Hello everyone, welcome to Banana Bites. Banana Bites are these short periodic narrations, the release of cool cases with good anatomical features that are instructive and useful to know. This case is entitled, Where is the Anterior Spinal Artery? So this is an individual with a particular syndrome that we will not discuss too much in consideration of privacy. As you can see, there's some spinal cord compression that's like at the lower thoracic level, right here. And so what we are asked to do is an angiogram to identify the anterior spinal axis, or the contribution, the radiculomedullary contributions to the anterior spinal axis. Why? This person is going to have a big fusion, and our surgeons are cognizant of the fact that big fusions with not exactly straightforward spinal osseous and muscular anatomy are a potential setup for injury to the anterior spinal axis, or the contributions to the anterior spinal axis, more likely at the radiculomedullary level. And so that's what we're asked to do, is to map out those contributions. So here we go. This is an aortogram. That's usually how we start, especially when the spine is not exactly very straight, just to give us a guide. Now proceed. We do our usual thing. Here we start just mapping them out. Right T5, and so we go. There's a lot of very interesting variants and a lot of good anatomy here to know in general before we get into the meat of our discussion. So here's left T7, for example. Always image the native image as well as the digital subtraction image, just so you know where you are, in case level is missing someplace. The arrow points to this post-transverse network. It's, in this case, like this relatively prominent longitudinal connection at the level of the spinous processes, from which you can, as you can see, you can identify a whole bunch of levels from one injection through these various longitudinal anastomoses. Here's another example of the same from the right T6 level. Another useful thing to know. So here, what we wanted to point out is these tufts. You see these black arrows pointing to these funny tufts. What are they? Are they fistulas? Are they tumors? Are they what? They are nothing. They're basically supplied to the back of the vertebral body. The arrow heads are pointing to the epidural venous network, or the ventral epidural arcade. That arcade that pacifies the kind of the back, the posterior aspect of the vertebral body, where that big vein is coming in as well. And so when you see these tufts, don't get confused. They're normal things. Okay, here's left T10. Now here we see a good variant as well. We see from one injection we are pacifying all of these intercostal arteries, right? But this is more like a direct connection. It doesn't look like these smaller kind of caliber anastomoses. You see the actual like main artery caliber leading to the intercostal arteries. So the black arrows are pointing to these anastomoses. So from the left T10, we're seeing not just the left T10 intercostal, but the left T9 and the left T11, correct? Here's the native image, so you can see how they're running under the ribs. There's some scoliosis there. That's why the ribs are a little bit weird. That's why the kind of the connection between the T10 and the T9 is a little bit squiggly, because that's where his problems are, kind of, and that's where a lot of the curvature is. Here's a stereo image now. This is a cross-eye stereo. For those of you that know how to do this, we didn't put in the anaglyphs. However, if you were to cross your eyes, you would see more than what meets one eye. Okay, here's left T12. So here we see like a typical, again, there's an epidural arcade, the ventral epidural kind of diamond-shaped thing, pacifying the other level. Nothing too great over here. So finally, here's what we were actually looking for. So you see the white arrow is pointing to the radiculomedullary artery. Now we're injecting the right L3, but it's not coming from right L3. The radiculomedullary is coming from the right L2. Radial 2 is opacified by the pre-transverse network, which is kind of the lateral aspect of the vertebral body. That's the dashed white arrow. And there's also this prevertebral anastomosis is what we call it. That's the open white arrow right there. That's in front of the vertebral body. Generally, the more proximal the anastomoses are, right, the more, that's kind of how you can figure out where they are. Proximal means in front of the vertebral body. The more distal you are on the segmental vessel, the more kind of lateral or posterior you're going to be. So here it is. We work it out a little bit more. So here's like a low mag injection. We see on the left image white arrow pointing to the radiculomedullary artery. White arrow heads are pointing to the anterior spinal artery. That's coming up to what this is, 2, 1, 12, maybe to T11 segment at the most. From above T11, you have competing inflow from a yet unidentified source to the anterior spinal axis. Now, on the third image from the left, we see the black arrow and the black arrow heads pointing to the venous structures, which is the radicular vein, the black arrow, and the spinal vein, either anterior or posterior, with the black arrow heads, right? It's very important that in the venous phase, we see the veins. That tells us that there's no venous hypertension there, at least qualitatively. That's very important information. Now, in the image that's most to the right, you can kind of get this kind of Kool-Aid thing that we like to do, which is to make the mask out of the arterial phase. So the arterial phase is the mask. And then the venous phase is the digitally subtracted image from the arterial phase. And so you see the arteries and veins at the same time. It is one of these weird facts that the radicular vein is almost never the same level as the radicular artery, probably just by chance alone. You can see them separately, right? So fine. So now we found the anterior, we've defined the anterior spinal axis to maybe T11 and then down. So on we go, we do this whole brain thing. We do the vertebral arteries, the deep cervical on both sides, right CCA, left CCA. Just show a few of them. We need to define the entire axis. Why? Well, sometimes there's a big anterior spinal that's coming all the way down, exceptionally rare, but we've seen one or two. And also, not to forget the fact that this might not be this person's last fusion. Who knows how many fusions are in store for this unfortunate disease person. So we're going to map out everything for the future. So here we are, no anterior spinal, right? On we go. Finally, we use some other catheters. And so eventually we can, with some difficulty, engage in this left T4. And so here we go. The left T4 gives off an anterior spinal, a radiculomedullary, that's the white arrow. And the anterior spinal is the black arrows, right? You can see how that projects in the middle on the spinous process in the native image. A useful thing to know. Well, fine. So where's the rest? We still haven't seen the middle. Kind of the thoracic area is still missing. So here, what to do? Well, we have to have the courage of our convictions, right? Like, we can't just assume that it's not there or it's filling through some collateral or some other like magical thinking that sometimes is entertained. No, there's no magic here. It has to come from somewhere. We just haven't found it. So where is it? Well, we go back to this. Now on the left you have an image from the Neurangio website. And on the right you have the left T10 injection. So what's happening here? Well, what's happening is we go back to these anastomoses between the left T10 segmental artery and the intercostal arteries. Now, those anastomoses are going through what's labeled by G here, the black arrows. G is the what do we call it? Not the prevertebral network. That's the whatever it's called. Basically it's a network in front of the costovertebral junction. Whatever the name is that escapes me. Well, anyway, That's the brain freeze moment. However, prevertebral, I think it's called the prevertebral anastomosis, right? Pretransverse anastomosis. Thank you. Pretransverse anastomosis. Thank you, brain. So that's G. The prevertebral one is C. And there's a post-transverse that's labeled I over there. That's by the spinous process. So anyway, so this pretransverse anastomosis, which is the black arrows, is how this thing is supplying, how the T10, the left T10 segmental artery is supplying the left T9, left T10, and left T11 intercostal arteries. Now, if you look at this picture, you start to see a funny thing, where what in this arrangement, like normally that we say, well, this is a conjoined thing, we don't have to look for the left T9, we don't have to look for the left T11 because it's already supplied through the left T10. The answer is no, that's not how it is, because this only supplies the back. What supplies the front of the vertebral body? Well, that is not coming from the left T10, so the left T9 and the left T11 vertebral bodies still have to have some sort of supply. The hemibodies, the left hemibodies anteriorly still have to have something. And likewise, as you can see, this pretransverse anastomosis is located distal to, say, the letter E or the letter O, which is where the radicular medullary or the radicular dural or the radiculopial arteries might come from. It's arising distal, typically from what's called the ventral and the dorsal divisions of the segmental artery. And so now you start to wonder, like, where is the anterior spinal artery? Well, as you can imagine, it's coming from the levels we didn't inject. And so here we go. This is the left T9. And so we go back and we struggle, and finally we can find this little tiny thing. And that tiny thing shows the anterior spinal artery. It's not labeled here because by now you should be able to recognize that. You can see the hemibody blush in the upper right picture. You see kind of the blush of the left T9 hemivertebral body and the radiculomedullary and the anterior spinal artery that is arising from it. Here we have it in a magnified view. That is the remaining contribution to the anterior spinal axis. So the bottom line is that, as we say, when you know anatomy, you can figure these things out. With that, we thank you for your attention to this Bananas Bites, and we hope to see you on our online Banana Zoom or Bananas series.